Alrighty, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at unemployment. All right, and so we'll just take a few notes down here. So unemployment, just in general, simply means somebody who is jobless. Okay, we'll beef up this definition just a little bit, but generally it's somebody that would like to have a job and can't find one. All right, and so to get a little more specific with the definition, we're going to say it's that to be considered unemployed, it has to be any person who is, any person 16 years or older, all right, and under retirement age. Okay, and so in the U.S., we might consider that 65 or 67, somewhere thereabouts. So any person 16 years or older who is non-institutionalized, institutionalized, that means not in jail or mental facility, things like that. So non-institutionalized, uh, civilian. All right, so you got to be 16 years or older. You can't be in jail. Got to be civilian, meaning that you're not in the military. So we don't count military when we do unemployment numbers. And you have to be civilian and looking for work. All right, and so if you meet these criteria, then you would be considered unemployed. And so obviously, not every single person is unemployed. Okay, because if we look at people like students, so these would be examples of not unemployed. So they don't have work, don't have jobs, but uh, they're not working. They don't have jobs, but they're not looking. So students might be it. Some people might retire early, retirees. Poor handwriting there, sorry. Uh, a group called discouraged workers. And those are people that have stopped looking for a job because, uh, maybe they looked for a year or two and couldn't find one, and they were just finally like, well, forget it. Not going to be able to do it. So anyway, so there's a lot of people out there that are not working but are not looking, and so they're not considered unemployed. Okay, so again, to be unemployed, you have to be 16 years old or older, and under the retirement age. Non-institutionalized, meaning not in jail. Civilian, meaning not in the military, and you have to be looking for work, actively looking for work. All right, so we need to do a couple of definitions here. The first definition that I want us to look at is what they call the labor force. All right, and so the labor force is simply the addition of the number of people employed plus number of people unemployed. All right, so the workers, so you got the people working and the people that want to work, and this gives you the labor force. So let's say we have a country that, you got 68 people that are employed, and you got 8 people that are unemployed, and so you'd say that the labor force here is 76. All right. Now, one of the statistics that economists look at is this thing called the labor force participation rate. Participation rate. And what this measures is, and what they want to look at is, of all the population that's out there that is of working age, all right? And so in the U.S., we'd look at who are all the people between the ages of 16 and 65, what percentage of them are in the labor force, are either working or want to work, all right? And so the formula to calculate the labor force participation rate is to simply take the labor force and divide that by the population. Now again, this is the population 16 and older, all right, so you wouldn't count babies, you wouldn't count somebody who's 98. This is just 16 and older population, and that's going to give you the labor force participation rate. You'll see it written like this. And so in the U.S., our current labor force participation rate is somewhere around 63%, meaning that if you look at the total population between 16 and 65 or so, 63% of those people are either working or want to work. All right. During the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, this number was up to 67. Somewhere around 1980, the end of the 70s, the number was around 63%. So we had an increase in the labor force participation rate, and now it's dropped back down. And the Great Recession is a big part of that. Okay. So labor force, number of people employed, plus the number of people unemployed. Here's how to be considered unemployed. All right, and then here's how to calculate the labor force participation rate. So now what we want to do, let's just switch to another slide here, is how to calculate the unemployment rate. Unemployment rate. All right. So just in its simplest form, the formula is number of people unemployed divided by the labor force. And remember, the labor force is made up of employed plus unemployed. All right, and so let's say that we have a labor force of 100. Let's say that 95 people are employed and 5 people are unemployed, so our labor force is 100. The number of unemployed would go on top. And then you have to multiply this, sorry, I forgot, by 100. That turns it into a percentage. So 5 divided by 100 times 100 equals 5%. And so in this economy, in this country, this would be a 5% unemployment rate. All right. So let me give you an example, and let me have you work this out. So let's just get rid of this all at once. All right. So let's say this is your country. We have a total population, total, meaning kids, elderly, the whole 9 yards, of 190 people. All right. We have a working age population of 160. We've got number of employed people is 85, and the labor force is 93. All right, so I want you to calculate two things. I want you to calculate the labor force participation rate, and I want you to calculate the unemployment rate. All right, so pause the video, get your calculator out, and see if you can figure this stuff out, okay? So hopefully you paused it and worked this out, because if you just watch me do it, it won't work like that on a test. So anyhow, to calculate the labor force participation rate, remember we need to take the number of people in the labor force, and so LFPR equals the labor force divided by the working age population, And so this would be, the labor force here was 93, and the working age population was 160. All right, and we have to multiply that by 100 to get us the percentage. So hopefully you came up with somewhere around 58%. All right, so it would mean that 58% of the people of working age are actually either have a job or looking for a job. So to calculate the unemployment rate, you will take the number of unemployed divided by the labor force. All right, and so times 100. And so we know that the number of unemployed, how would you calculate that? Well, we know the labor force equals 93. We know to get the labor force, you have to take unemployed plus the employed. All right, and so this is a little word problem. Labor force is 93. If the employed is 85, then what's this number? Okay, what plus 85 equals 93? And so that would be 8. So we would take 8 divided by the labor force, which is 93, times 100, and that equals 8.6%. All right, so that's how you're going to calculate the unemployment rate. All right, now just one or two more things. This won't be too much longer. I want to go over a couple of terms and some of the limitations of of the unemployment rate, of looking at it when they, currently it's 7.9%, and so that's not the best number. We're going to look at why there's some issues with that. But anyway, a couple terms that you definitely need to know is this term of being underemployed. All right, if you are underemployed, then that means that you are working in a job and you are overqualified. So this might be somebody who has a doctorate in physics flipping hamburgers at a McDonald's. Okay, they have a job, they're considered employed, but that's not the employment that's best for them or frankly best for society. We want people who have doctorates in physics doing physics stuff. We don't want them flipping burgers. And so people who are underemployed are considered employed, but they are not happy. All right, and so they'd be considered unemployed. Now, what about part-time work? If you work 2 hours a week, and let's say that you want to work 40 hours a week, you are considered employed. Here you're considered employed. All right, and so you're considered employed, but again, you are not happy about this. All right. Now, the other term that you need to be familiar with is this term called discouraged workers. And again, we talked about it earlier. These are workers that have dropped out of the labor force. So imagine you lose your job because of a recession. Things are bad in the economy, and you lose your job, and you're unemployed for 6 months, and then you're unemployed for 8 months, and you're looking, but you can't find anything. And after, let's say, a year and a half of looking, that would wear on you. That would be very hard to constantly be looking for a job and constantly be being told no, not being able to find something. So a lot of people at some point they get fed up and they stop. All right, and so when they stop, that affects how we calculate the unemployment rate, because if you have, let's just do this example real quick. Let's say that the labor force is 93, and we know that we had 8 workers that were unemployed. All right, so what's going to happen to the labor force and the number of unemployed? Let's say 2 of these workers drop out. All right, and so they become discouraged, and so 2 of our unemployed people drop out. So that goes to 6. All right, and the labor force is going to go down by those 2 as well. And so now we've got 6 divided by 91 times 100. And that's going to equal 6.6%. And this is a key point that I want you to pay close attention to, and that is, look what's happened. People got discouraged, and so they dropped out. So it was so bad, they decided to stop looking. But when they dropped out, look what happened to the unemployment rate. It went down. And so when you see this number on the news, and they say the unemployment rate goes down, typically the average person's going to think, wow, that's great. Unemployment went down by 2%. That's a huge number. Times are great. No worries. And so when you look into the numbers and you see that, you know what, it went down because people are so frustrated that they just stopped looking for work, that's a bad thing. And so you can have numbers when the unemployment rate goes down where you'd say this is a bad thing. Conversely, like what happened last month, October of 2012 in the U.S., we added something like 170,000 private sector jobs, and our unemployment rate went up. And so we had this great news that jobs, we had a lot of hiring, but somehow the unemployment rate went up. And so you'd say, initially your first guess is, wow, unemployment rate went up, this is bad. But what happened is more people seemingly started to come back into the labor force. So more of these discouraged workers came back. So let's look what would happen. Let's do the math here. Let's say that we had four workers in this economy, in this country, that were discouraged. So they were kind of sitting over here on the sidelines. So you had these 4 hanging out on the sidelines. They weren't involved in the labor force. So they think that the economy's getting better, and so they decide to come back in and try and work. And so now they're considered unemployed, and so now our number goes to 12, all right, because that's the number of unemployed. That means we've increased the labor force up to 97. And so if we do the math, 12 divided by 97 times 100, All right, that's going to give us 12.4% basically. And so this is where the numbers can play games with you. If you saw this economy and you said the unemployment rate went from 8.6 up to 12.4, you would say this is terrible. All right, but this would be a good thing because you would say, look, for some reason people are more optimistic and they're coming back into the labor force. And when they do that, they add to the number of unemployed and they add to the labor force. And so just because the unemployment rate goes up or down doesn't really tell you anything. You need to know why it happens. It could be this number going up could be because a bunch of people lost their job, and that would be bad. Or it could be that things are looking up, people are optimistic, and so they're coming back and trying to find work. All right, so that's kind of the spiel on that, and I didn't mean to go on quite as long, but that's a very important point because politicians can play kind of fast and loose with the numbers. That right before the election, when it came out, it was very good news for Obama because he said, hey, jobs went up 170,000, good thing. Romney looked at it and said, unemployment rate went up. And so you need to know a little bit of the background to it to figure that out. So anyway, so those are our discouraged workers. All right. Now the last thing that I want to talk about, and I'll try to be kind of quick, are some of the problems that we have with looking at unemployment. All right. And I'm just going to list out 4 real quick and show you a couple of graphs. So sometimes we have geographic discrepancies, or disparities, I'm sorry, meaning when you see the unemployment rate in the U.S. of 7.9%, does that mean it's 7.9% in New York and California and South Carolina and Georgia and Hawaii and the whole, no. All right, some areas have different unemployment rates. You might see age disparities. Young people typically have a higher unemployment rate than middle-aged people. You see gender disparities, male versus female unemployment rates. And finally, you have ethnic disparities. All right, and so we're going to look at all these charts. So let's take a look. Let me find, that's what I want. So this first one is unemployment rate by age. All right, so you can see this goes from February of 2002 to February of 2011. And so you can see here was the Great Recession, but take a look, 16 to 19 years old, much higher unemployment rate. Got up to 25%, 1/4 of 16 to 19-year-olds who were looking for work could not find a job. And then it goes all the way down to the bottom, 65. So you can see that the younger you are, the more unemployed you are. All right, the older you get, and that kind of intuitively makes sense. But anyway, so that's the older workers. That'd be the age disparity. What about this? Unemployment rates by ethnicity. All right, this is from October of 2011. And so you can see here, this is Asian workers, white, Hispanic, and black. And so this is definitely a disparity, and for whatever reason this exists, it is something that should be addressed. But it is there. And so when you look at the unemployment rate of 7.9%, it doesn't tell you any of this. It just says, here's the overall picture, but it doesn't say, oh, and here's how it is for different ethnic groups, different races, or different genders, or different age groups, different regions. Okay, 2 more real quick. This is a big mess, but this is different cities. So you can see Boston, Hartford, Providence, Albany, New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. Anyway, if you're this line, you're not happy. All right, if you're this line, if you're living in this city, you're happy. All right, things are pretty good. And so again, this is a big mess, and I don't expect you to be able to look at this and make much sense of it. The only sense I want you to make is that if we pick any point in time, depending on which region you live, you're going to have a different unemployment rate. All right. So let me get back to this. So those are some of the problems with it. And real quick, let's just recap. Unemployment, make sure you know the definition. All right. The 4 things: 16, non-institutional, civilian, and looking for work. The labor force is the number of people employed and the number of people unemployed. Add those together to get the labor force participation rate. Take the labor force divided by the population. All right. To calculate the unemployment rate, you'll have to be able to do this. Unemployment rate is simply the number of unemployed divided by the labor force. And again, the labor force is unemployed plus employed. All right. And the last little thing, that I do want to mention to you is they have different measures for unemployment. It goes from U1 all the way down to U6. The one we see on the news is U3, and that means that underemployed people are counted as employed, part-time workers are counted as employed. U6 adjusts for all this stuff. Okay, underemployment, part-time, discouraged workers. And U6, so this is 7.9. U6 is somewhere around 15%. And this is a much better number. Really, it would be nice if the news agencies reported this number, because this means 15% of the people, of the labor force, don't have either a job, B, the job that they want, okay, or C, working the number of hours that they would like. So this is where we're at currently. If you want a real picture, that's the real picture, that we're at about 15% of people who are not satisfied with where their job situation is. So anyway, rambled on a little bit, apologize, but anyway, until next time.